I'd bet. Are you saying that I should start this thing? Okay. All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Tuesday, April 28th meeting of the Finance Committee, CCWD. Would you all please rise and join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, republic, one nation, under God. All right, moving on to the, let's call the roll here, please.
Director Garamendi?
Present.
Director Thomas?
I'm also present. Okay, next item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have anyone online for public comment?
Mind if I make a public comment real quick?
Sure.
Just because we had told some members of the public that we had planned to do an evaluation of our status of the need for a rate increase this July at this meeting. And we decided to push that analysis to May Finance Committee meeting, where we'll also be discussing the preliminary budget, so that we're not, it ended up being better if we do those together, so we're not putting one in front of the other, and we're still putting some work into that one. So we'll have, I think, an important discussion about reserves today, but we'll be pushing that discussion into the May Finance Committee meeting. So just wanted to let folks know where that stands.
Okay. Did I hear negatively on the question about online?
No online public comment.
Okay.
Oh, there's one from.
Okay, I'm being told that Mark Carter has a public comment. Do you have your hand raised, Mark?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes. Continue, please.
Yeah, I wanted to pass on. It was my understanding that there would be either implementation or discussion of enhanced financial reporting today on separate line items on residential revenues for base water rate revenue, tiered rate water consumption revenue, and sewer revenues, rather than being all combined together, and relating to the current 5-year rate increases. And that'd be both past and future over the 5-year period. And I just want to say that as the county planning commissioner for District 5, it's 30 years ago now, residents have continued to reach out to me regarding community concerns. And currently, a lot of these concerns relate to CCWD as ratepayers who are trying to comprehend and work through all these ongoing rate increases. And a majority of these folks now are retired, living on fixed incomes, along with myself. It's my hope that the board and staff will move forward on this, and then implementing your commitments towards transparency, and revenue transparency would be a good start on that. And I look forward to hearing your discussions today. And I just wanted to put that out there, and thanks for your time.
Okay, Mark, if you had been listening to our general manager's comments about those revelations, specific revelations about the potential for a rate increase and the items that would be influencing that will be discussed, not at this meeting, but unfortunately they had to be moved because of some continuing analysis that's going on. Michael, you said what meeting date?
So the rate discussion will be the May Finance Committee meeting, but to Mr. Carter's other point, very briefly on the financial report, changes. We do have some updates on that, but it's not on the agenda here today. But we'll reach out to you separately and provide you an update with that.
That would be fine. Is that something I'd follow up with you and staff on?
We'll reach out to you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carter. Anyone else?
No other online comment.
Okay, seeing no other public comments, we have to approve the March 17th approval of the minutes of that date. Okay, I would second that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that the meeting minutes of March 17th are approved. Going on to new business, we have a report on the monthly financial reports for March of 2026. That's a 9-month status report by Kelly Zunheiser.
Director Thomas. There we go. All right. So this month we're going to be covering the March status report. First slide is pretty straightforward. It's got our total revenues and total expenses. That's including all of our services included in those totals. As I go through this, please feel free to stop me at any point. We can address questions as they come up, and I can hopefully answer those questions. Revenue total to date as of March 31st is 25.8 million. Expenses are 27.6 million.
Kelly?
Yes,
as you
sir.
Look at, I mean, obviously our expenses are revenues are greater, expenses are greater than our revenues.
Correct.
I understand a lot of that
Mhm.
prepayments. I think, does it look like we're heading for the right point?
We are on the right track. Yes, sir. All righty. Moving on to the details. So we've got water, sewer, and hydro combined, Schedule 1. I'll just go through and hit the high points, and if there's anything in particular that you would like me to clarify, please let me know. Total operating revenue is trending, so we're looking at the 75% mark for the 9-month period. Total operating revenues are right on track. Non-operating are a little bit low at 56.1 for total revenues at 71.5%. Next page, we've got total salaries and benefits at 70%. Moving on, there's lots of stuff on that page. Next page, total services and supplies, 66.2. Total capital outlay at 46.1.
Hang on just a second.
Yes, sir.
I'm just trying to catch up.
Of course.
What page are you on now?
I'm on page number 6 of Schedule 1. Of course. Total O&M expenses are at 66.4. So we're trending below the target on the expenses for all of the combined detail. Debt services are at 95.7, and that's expected because we had our payments earlier in the year. So we'll have the second round of payments, which will bring all the rest up to.
Kelly, I have a question. You mentioned 66.4% as of this date. That means that we have 3 months remaining. Maybe Damon might weigh in on responding to this question, but do we encounter a situation where you get close to the end of the year and you haven't purchased all your chemicals and you haven't, is there a disproportionate amount of expenses that come in the last 90 days?
It'd be interesting to see if there's a trend on that. We don't have a philosophy of, rush to spend. If you haven't spent it by the end of the fiscal year, it's, spend it as needed. But in general, that, there may be some of that.
No, I would, Michael's right. I would say not generally. We're not kind of rushing to spend. We do identify opportunities though. If we haven't made this purchase, we only have it this fiscal year. We don't intend to request it again. We will then move forward and make a purchase, but it's not a run on the bank, so to speak.
Okay, I'll hold you to it.
All right.
Thank you.
Kelly, I've got a quick question on Schedule 1. Our overtime's going up quite a bit. We keep an eye on that? I mean, is that related to the Snowmageddon or?
The vast majority of it is yes. We have a meeting tomorrow, kind of an after action review. I did submit the overtime for the storm.
Right.
pretty much the week after, but it's been crickets. And I think it's just kind of a more broad group of crickets, coming from the feds in terms of what's going to happen with that disaster declaration. And hopefully, we find out more about what the state's going to do, or if the state's going to do anything tomorrow.
What was our for Snowmageddon?
Close to just over actually 70K of overtime only.
Yeah. Thank you.
Alrighty, so let's move on to, unless you have any questions on any of the detail, we'll move on to Schedule 2. Schedule 2 is just the revenue for all other funds combined. That total is 18.4 million. Same time last year, we were at 20.7.
Can I ask a quick question? We've got a massive jump in expansion fees, as well as a major change in the assessment revenue down. Anything we need to know about those? Expansion fees. We brought in 386,000 more than we
Did the prior year, yes.
did the year before. Same thing with assessment revenues. Is there anything we need to know about those? Significant amount of dollars.
Paparopoulos? I'll have to look into that.
I'll have
for
to
and
look
get
into that too,
specific,
'cause
yeah.
that would normally, sorry, what line are you on?
I'm on line, this is line
14.
14, expansion fees.
Page 10.
Last fiscal year, we had 323,000. This year we got 709, which is good. Not being critical, this is a good thing. It's notable. And then we have assessment revenue went down by $100,000.
We'll have to look into that and get back to you.
We'll look into,
Could that be, I seem to recall that the developers in Valley Springs have prepaid some of their assessments.
we'll look into
About
it.
$500,000. If you could let me know, it looks like it's an accounting issue. Might have come in at different times, different places. Get a sniff.
Moving on to Schedule 3, which is non-departmental. We have those. Again, you'll see we've got all the interest expenses for all the loans. So that is at a 90.9% of for that period of time. Moving on to,
And I'm sorry, Kelly.
yes, sir, of
Back
course.
on Schedule 3.
Mhm.
Our retired employees' costs changed at 87%. We anticipate that going down next year. I understand correctly?
I will have to look into that one. I think that was,
Not a big number.
I wouldn't expect it to go down. We just are never quite sure how much of an increase it's going to be.
Gotcha.
we're planning to budget closer to actual. I think there were some unanticipated retirements that occurred, so
Right.
those costs are being
Right,
flagged for
we-
this fiscal year, and we'll know more for next fiscal year and be able to account for those positions.
Gotcha.
For Schedule 4, which is.
Could I ask you a question about Schedule 3 as it pertains to this debt service, the interest payments?
Yes, sir.
I was running this company. We are, but if I was responsible for the day-to-day allocations of the pennies and dollars, I would want to know how much time is remaining on these principal payments. And we have an adopted budget of $6,705,000 in interest payments to make, but that might be significantly reduced if some of these are nearing their retirement date.
That's a great recommendation. I think we can definitely incorporate that into the schedule.
Okay, I'm not trying to overly burden your efforts here, but See what I'm talking about? Okay, right. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the recommendation.
On schedule 4.
Yes.
So
Good.
just to clarify, because we'll have a different schedule for each of those. Are you suggesting that we add it to the monthly report?
Well, it just would be comforting to know that, you know, some of these individual annual payments might be avoided next year.
My thought was something like payment 1 of 100,
Yeah.
something like that. That just shows where we are in the process of paying those loans off.
Most of these are not near maturity. There's a couple the PERS UAL loan, we'll have to check and see. I know the back on we paid off, but that's already indicated here. So some of the smaller
The top half.
might be coming off the books here. New Hogan was a big one, but that's gone now. But most of the significant infrastructure loans are still relatively young.
Well, how about the VACON trucks and stuff that's they're in interest payments on the VACON truck 2021 on line 52? That's we have paid $90,000 worth of interest.
I think they're both paid off now. So that one might be.
Those dates would be, you know,
Yeah.
those periods would be helpful in explaining
Okay.
that story.
That would satisfy my request. Okay, you can go on to 4 if you want, schedule 4.
Yes, sir. All righty, we're in Department 54, which is Utility Services. We're looking at total salaries and benefits at 72%. We've got total utility services of 65.4, materials and supplies 57.4, total outside services 64.1. Moving on to page 16. Online. Let's see, we've got vehicles and equipment at 69.5. Office expenses 52.8. Stop boring everybody and get down to the bottom line. Services expenses were 66.3%, which is right where we'd like to be. Any questions on utility services?
Quick one on paving, and I understand why we're over budget. That's fine. I want to I would guess this happens every year. Something goes wrong on a
So-
paving project.
One line item within operations, well, maybe not every year, but you know,
No, that's a
last
tough
year it was
one.
pumps and motors.
Always
Paving
one.
this year, one main break.
Oh, that was
Almost
a big.
300 feet of paving on Dunn Road.
So there's always,
Price of asphalt.
I just want to make sure you got enough as we build our budget for next year.
Yeah, there's usually a bad actor, but we try to keep everybody in line, but it's, you know, pumps and motors has surprised us here and there because we have a replacement regimen going. This year was paving. Yeah.
I get it. Just make sure we've got, in case it happens. OSHITE fund.
Okay, moving on to general management, 56. That budget is looking very good. We are at 68.7 overall. Individual line items, materials and supplies at 74%. Outside services, no, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong line. Total salaries and benefits at 74%. Materials and supplies at 45.2. Outside services at 42.6. Professional services, 54.1. We're a little bit over on total office expenses at 116.8. Travel and training, 75.4. And miscellaneous, 15% unemployment claims fall under that one. And miscellaneous non-operating at 5.7. Any questions on general management?
Nope, not
Right.
for me.
Next, we've got Board of Directors. Guys are perfect at 69.9. Any questions on that one?
Perfect.
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 You're under budget. That means you're perfect.
I don't know that that's a generally widespread attitude.
Chief is very specific.
Okay, good.
All righty. Next, we have engineering. Engineering total salaries and benefits at 63.6. You've got total materials and supplies at 56.8. Outside services at 55%. Professional services at 27.4. Skipping down to travel and training, 4.3. Oops, I'm on the wrong line. Total office expenses, 4.3.
Kelly?
Yes, sir.
Under salaries and benefits, again, same thing to overtime.
Yes, sir. I think we have rationale for that one. It says it's trending over budget due to the inspectors working with the contractors on the A to B pipeline that we did. So I think that was some of that overtime, and we do track it. So
I'm a small businessman. I always watch the.
I understand.
The inspectors overtime fluctuates depending on what's going on with project. And so, yeah, A to B has
I get it.
been demanding.
So let's see, travel and training, 41.6, and capital is at 0. And that total is 53.3 for the entire budget unit. Any questions on engineering budget?
Question?
And on to administration. So we've got salaries and benefits at 57.7. Materials and supplies at 88.9. Outside services at 48%. Professional services at 67. Office expenses at 47.5. Travel and training at 9.6%. That particular item, we are going to be using a little bit of time for that. As we've gotten fully staffed up in the division, there is a need for training. So we will be using some of that budget in the near future. Total operating expenses, total operating fees, 89.2. Bad debt at 50.3. Miscellaneous operating expenses at 69.8. The transfers out, 70.4. Yes, sir.
I might just keep interrupting if that's okay. It looks like our rate assistance program is tracking.
Yes.
Does that mean it's not oversubscribed at the moment? Because I know as we build our budget, we discussed whether we had adequate funding in there.
My understanding is that we capped that program. So there's a
Yeah.
limit to how many people we can have in the program.
So I think the discussion is whether we should add more budget more for it, but
Right.
I think customer service is usually really good about making sure that we try to do outreach to make sure the program fills up, but that we don't sign up more than we have budgeted.
Do we have more demand than we have dollars for?
And I'd have to check and see what the current status is. There was a while where it was not full, which was
Right.
surprising to us, because historically it has always been more demand than we have room for. So we can get an update
Yeah,
on that.
We can look into that.
Yeah, let's just, when we do it, as you build this budget for this next meeting, I want to, if we're meeting the demand budget we got, that's awesome. We need more budget because there's more demand. We need,
I'll check with customer service.
because right now it looks like it's tracking straight on. Thank
But
you.
Right, of course.
It began at 60,000. Should take a look at. Most of the other items are incrementally increasing year over year, so
Don't want to increase it if it's not necessary.
We'll check with customer service and see if they're getting a lot of people reaching out for it. The bottom line is 68.6 for total administrative expenses. One more to go, guys. You have water resources. There. So salaries and benefits are at 70%. Total materials and supplies at 65. Total outside services which are at 235%. Legal, 12.3. Professional services, 101.2.
Let me stop you there, Kelly.
Of course.
On the professional services, obviously we're making high. Is that the Divine contract that drove that up?
No, that's actually, we ended up spending more on the urban water management plan than we budgeted for. So we brought that to the board for approval of that contract. So I believe that is the explanation for that, but.
That was about $30,000, if I remember correctly.
Over, I think we budgeted 50 and it came in closer to 100 for urban water management plan,
That's a one-time fee.
once every 5 years.
But it's purpose of next month's budget.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Ready, total travel and training at 71.9. Skipping down to operating fees, 53.3. Miscellaneous operating expenses at 59.7, and there is no capital equipment. Total percentage used is 65.5%. That budget update.
Michael, under the operating fees, the federal dam and admins fees, that's what we pay to Stockton East, right? To
We
the Army
probably
Corps
have
through them?
multiple federal
I'm
dam
sorry,
and
that's
admin
probably on the New
fees.
Hogan operating
No, that's
maintenance.
mostly Norfolk project. And then we recover that through reimbursement.
Yeah.
But it's probably New Hogan too, although we would recover that through the, not from Stockton East.
Yeah, no, New Hogan's got its own.
Any other questions? Do it again next month.
Looking at all these numbers, it really kind of points out how fortunate that we are that we, years ago, the implementation of the property tax assistance, looks like it's equal to about what we spend on interest payments. So we would be in a world of hurt without that.
On debt service.
Okay. Okay, I'm pleased to hear you talk. I see you back in the back of the room, and it's wonderful to have you up in front. Good.
Thank you for having me, sir. Appreciate it.
Kelly, is there anything in this budget, as we head towards budget next month, that raises you concern or things that we ought to ponder as a committee?
Nothing at this time, sir. As I'm going through working with Kamiko on next year's budget, and she's been so gracious to help with that process, I'm evaluating where we are at this point, projecting out the last 3 months of the year. And so far, every budget that I've reviewed, we're right on track. So, or below, which is very promising. So no promises, but just for right now, I'm seeing good things.
You're not
And I wanted to make sure I said one thing before I complete my report. I wanted to thank Kylie for her hard work on this report. She is the unsung hero behind this report and just about everything we do in this division. And I want to make sure that she's recognized accordingly. So please.
Thank you, Kylie.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I take it that you're not concerned about the 2,000% overage on the uniforms?
Not too bad.
Not too bad.
Not too concerned, sir.
Okay.
Kelly, as you look at these cash flow statements, are you done with your report? Are we going on to those?
Oh, sure. We can move on.
Anything in the cash flow that's causing you any heartburn?
I think we'll hear a little bit about heartburn when we start talking about the reserves a little bit. So why don't I save that thunder for the next conversation? And then
Cash flow money seems to be,
money
flowing
seems to be flowing
correctly.
properly, coming in and going out. I think where we're going to run into some consequences is when we look at trying to fund some of those reserves that are on the books. So that will impact cash flow if we decide to address those issues. Of course.
Okay. Are we going to move on to the contract with WebSoft? Okay, are you ready, Damon?
30 pages of contract.
Yeah, yes. So kind of giving you the backstory. In 2019, the district identified an opportunity to provide a greater accountability and greater clarity just in the overall operation. And we did not have a maintenance management system, like a work order system or a service request system here at CCWD. So we formed a working group and we reviewed.
Well, we did have a system. It was fax machines.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that is what it was.
It was what?
Fax machines.
Oh.
Yes, yes, exactly. So the working group over a period of about a year reviewed multiple proposals from folks like Cartograph, CityWorks, NextGen, Maintenance Connection, and ultimately settled on what's called mobile MMS through WebSoft developers. It was the cheapest, but it was also the most malleable. Bless you.
Bless you.
So the contract that we have, and it remains to this day, and it's been since, it was part of the reason why we chose them, is that we have an opportunity to make adjustments and changes to the system as we identify opportunities to change and adjust. And so the MMS of 2020 is not the same MMS of 2026. And so, for example, excuse me, we have operational dashboards where we can look at service requests relative to work orders, relative to department. We have production over consumption incorporated into the system. It's map based for a period of time. And I think we would have all loved to have continued this. We budgeted in additional dollars, some $10,000 a couple years in there to make adjustments to deficiencies that we ID'd on our maps and had WebSoft do that work for us. So overall, there's been a whole host of things that they have allowed us to improve upon here at CCWD, and the relationship continues. What was interesting is in summer of 2025, we find out that WebSoft had been purchased, excuse me, to Springbrook or by Springbrook. And so one of Springbrook's kind of priorities was to get all of the WebSoft accounts under contract with Springbrook. And so our account, you can see it in the original agreement, begins in September. So we started to have this conversation last summer, and kind of throughout the fall and into the winter, we would have some back and forth with the folks that we work at WebSoft and with our council. So Matt then got involved, started talking to the folks at Springbrook. And what you have before you here is kind of the result of the back and forth between our council and Springbrook's attorneys about our agreement. One of the things that was really important to us is to understand that we wouldn't lose the contacts at WebSoft that we currently work with. And so that's true. There is no change to who we work with. There's essentially no change to what we are doing. What is changing is the name in the contract and the amount of detail in the contract. So it really goes into detail about cloud operation. It goes into detail about if we are not responding in a timely manner, or if we don't attend a meeting when we're required to attend a meeting. A lot of kind of detail-oriented components that ultimately don't change the scope of what it is that we do with WebSoft. And so after this period of time and back and forth, we felt as we were looking towards the next budget year that it would be a good time to transition the contract to Springbrook. And so this helps the WebSoft team. You know, they're kind of like, hey, they're kind of in a pinch right now. And so what has happened though since 2019 that we should highlight is the original agreement was a 3-year agreement. And then after that agreement, we just kind of went year over year. Excuse me, making ultimately really no changes. So what this contract is asking for is another 3-year. And then at the end of that 3-year, we would have an opportunity to pause and take stock in what it is we're doing. If we wanted to change direction or what have you at that point, that would be an opportunity to do so. Cost wouldn't change year one, but there would be a 7% escalator. So ultimately, you're at from 40,000 just over to 46,000. But what wouldn't change, right, is that, you know, you have a Springbrook maintenance connection or mobile MMS, excuse me, representative here to work with staff to to work through items, if we can identify opportunities for improvements, or if we want to add things, all of that still can happen. And so the ask is that the finance committee approve or kind of validate the request when this is brought to the full board.
When I saw the name Springbrook, I kind of
Yeah.
took a pause to consider that. But, started off by mentioning first analysis or first review of the need for something like this. You consulted with other companies.
We did, yeah.
I can see in the not too distant future go from 46,000 to 100,000. I'm on the pulse of what other developers are out there, and just we based on my experience in business, you don't necessarily have to say yes to any proposed price increase. Well, maybe not. We're looking around. What do you guys think? I think that I can concur with Jack that this is an okay deal. I was kind of struck by the fact that I signed the authorization back in 2019.
Yeah.
That it didn't have Springbrook associated with it.
Right.
I think we can forward that they
I appreciate that.
look
Yeah.
upon this with favor.
Yep. Noted. Yep. Your comments are noted for sure. Absolutely.
It probably, I think I commented to you earlier about that it might have cost our legal expenses probably 20,000 to review the contract. So.
Right. Yeah. Right. You go from 3 or 4 pages to 50. I totally get it.
Okay,
All right. Thank you.
moving on. What about discussion on reserve policies? Bring dinner?
Oh, no, I had lunch before I got here. All fed.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring snacks. Okay, today we're going to talk about our reserve policies. The district, as you know, maintains several reserve funds to ensure financial stability, support long-term infrastructure investment, and mitigate risks associated with revenue volatility, emergencies, and capital needs. As part of ongoing financial planning and in alignment with best practices for public utilities, staff have reviewed the structure and purpose of the existing reserves. This report that we're going to do today summarizes key reserve categories, evaluates the current role, and outlines the potential policy considerations for each one. So we'll start off with the purposes of our reserves. Core purposes of the reserves are to maintain service reliability and infrastructure, to stabilize rates over time, provide for emergency preparedness, fund capital replacements and expansion, ensure cash flow and debt obligations. And reserves are essential to financial stability and risk management. Elements of a reserve policy: the California State Auditor recommends that reserve policies include defined types of reserves, clear purpose of each reserve, minimum and or maximum target levels, conditions that trigger the uses of the reserves, alignment with our capital planning, and board approval, and of course, periodic reviews to ensure that the reserves are still valid and are working as they should. There are common reserve categories. We have all of these: operating and maintenance reserves, emergency reserves, capital replacement, CIP reserves, rate stabilization reserves, debt service reserves, system expansion or capacity fees, and those are restricted reserves, as I'm sure you are aware.
Kelly, let me ask you a quick question. What do you mean by capital replacement CIP?
So when we get a little bit further in, you'll see that we have a plan, we have reserves in place to fund capital projects. And it's kind of one of those reserves that is an interesting one. So A good
I'll wait-
question.
I'll wait for the,
Okay, sounds great. Typical reserve level targets. So for operating reserves, standard are 2 to 6 months of operating expenses. Emergencies can run 1 to 3 months. Rate stabilization, 10 to 25% of annual revenue, or a 1 year of volatility buffer. Capital replacement are usually based on the asset life cycle of the CIP and are usually not an arbitrary percentage. Debt services are per the bond covenants. So depends on what the requirement of the bond is. That tells us how much we should be setting aside.
Is that 1 year of debt service, is that our total debt service obligation or just for that particular bond?
For that particular bond. Yeah. Looking at key gaps in smaller rural districts, as you know, we're special because we're smaller. Other larger jurisdictions have different policies and different reserve structures. But smaller rural districts tend to have these problems. The reserve categories are defined, but the targets are not clearly quantified. There are limited rate stabilization strategies. There's a weak linkage between reserves and long-term CIP. No formal replenishment timelines or guidelines in some cases, had another word in there. Other reliance on available fund balance versus structured reserves. So sometimes they'll say, hey, we've got this much left over. Let's just go ahead and throw it into the reserve. It's not a reliable structure to have. So just to kind of point out that one in particular. Let's jump right in. So 5.00.601 operating reserves. We currently have this type of reserve, and the funds are active working capital cash and operating reserves. The purpose is to cover timing differences and may also be used to cover unanticipated operating expenses or lower than anticipated revenue collections. So this fund for us, we have 1 month of budgeted annual expenditures and debt service. The target would be 2.8 million. And actually, as of July, we had 2.3 million. So we're under on that one by $500,000. Took it a little step further and wanted to look at some local, I call it the tri-county comparison.
just real quick on the actual one or for our operating reserves. What metrics, you said it's 1 month? What do we?
Correct. That's the policy is 1 month of operating
Month of operating.
expenses. For the tri-county comparison, in this case, TUD, they have a minimum of 90 days and a maximum of 270 days. And for AWA, their target is between 90 days and 180 days. And so like that kind of goes back to that smaller district where they're just putting in these large, here's the window of what we could possibly fund, and they don't really have a set target. So I think that is weakness where we say we want 30 days. That's easy to measure. We know how much our expenses are for 30 days. Moving on to the 90-day emergency operating. This is to protect against financial impacts from unanticipated catastrophes or emergencies. The target level is equal to the required cash flow until emergency financing can be secured, or approximately 3 months of budgeted annual expenses. So as you can see, 3 months would be 8.3 million. Currently, we're at 4.3 million in the balance.
Kelly,
Does that include-
if I could interrupt you for just 1 second, we have these actuals, like on this particular one, 2.3 million, and previously we had a fund cash balance report. So where on that cash balance report would I find that 2.3 million?
So it's part of the operating cash. It's a component of that cash. It's not completely set aside. So kind of look at it like we divvy up the pot of money into different components. That piece is enough to cover that 3 months of expenses if we needed to do that. And it wouldn't impact the operations.
Which fund? So it's not in one of these funds?
It is in the revenue. I'm going to say this wrong. Is Kamiko on the line? She says it better than I do. Kamiko?
I'm here.
Bail me out, Kamiko, because you say this much better than I do.
Okay, well, can you repeat what we're trying to convey to them?
Where, where are these reserves in the fund cash balance report?
So they're looking at the 90-day reserve and the operating
Yeah.
reserve.
Really, any of them?
Okay, let me pull that up. One moment.
Thank
I see a
you.
water interest, I see interest reserve. Ours. Got it?
R&R is going to be a different one. One second.
Okay, so 308 and 508 are the interest reserve funds. And in
Say
those
308 and
funds,
508?
yes, 308 and 508, in the interest reserve funds, there are components, as Kelly said, that meet some of these reserves that she's going over. The reserve that she just talked about that had about 2 million, that one's in 300 and 500.
100. It's the water fund and the sewer fund. Okay, and
Yes.
the interest reserves are the other, something else. Thank you.
Okay. The tri-county comparison, all three districts have a
minute.
component.
Wait,
Yes,
I'm sorry.
it's okay.
I'm seeing the sewer fund and the water fund. Where's the 90-day? Where's that 4.3 sit?
90-day is in 308 and 508.
They're part of that, so it's not broken out.
Yes, correct. Not in this report.
Okay, so in all three districts have a component of an emergency reserve. TUD has a 2% and AWA has a policy where their GM can decide to spend with the board president's concurrence up to $100,000, and then they take that to their board. They have a target to maintain an emergency reserve fund of $500,000 for water and sewer. Asset replacement is to fund the repair and
Where's the emergency reserve totals? That's budgeting item.
That's
not
part of
fund.
that interest reserve. Are you talking about in the fund balance?
Yeah, I'm not seeing like the other ones have target actual over under. Emergency reserve doesn't have one.
Oh, if you go back to that, I think
Yes.
it did.
It did. For the
There.
I'm
emergency-
sorry. I was looking at the wrong page. My
That's
bad.
okay.
My apologies.
Yeah, so that one is one we're well under, and I think, it's partly just a function of how the budget has grown, and we need to increase, increase transfers to that fund to make sure that it keeps up. So that's something we'll be developing a plan for, not all in one shot, but we'll be.
I was looking at the wrong page.
Yeah, we'll get back on track. And I think those comparisons with TUD and Amador are helpful. We have a lot in common with those agencies, so I think it can be instructive. But it just kind of overall bigger picture, it goes to show there's different ways to arrive at what end up being kind of similar, overall reserve targets, but we put more of it in the 90-day emergency fund versus the operating reserve fund. But overall, we're all shooting to have some assurance there, however it is split among those things.
Okay, moving on to asset replacement, to fund the repair and replacement of existing equipment and infrastructure. There was an ordinance update that was completed in 2023 that was supposed to restructure the reserve policy. And from the investigating that we did, I haven't seen that was implemented fully. And so this is one of the items that I would recommend that we bring back with a change to accurately represent how that fund is working. So you'll see that these two amounts are in Fund 325 for water and Fund 525 for sewer. This is what was formerly known as R&R funds. Right.
Is that a reserve or is that just a savings account? Are we using the terms correctly? I mean, we're saving for replacing and repairing.
So it's about earmarking money for certain purposes. So having an idea how much money they have available when we do the CIP, knowing what the balance is that we can roll forward into maintaining all the facilities. purchasing equipment, all of those things. Kind of, it's good to have a place where you're,
I'm all
But
for,
the money's going to
it.
move in and out of it.
I'm all for
regularly.
having a savings account for that, for R and R. Just, I guess it's a semantics. I think of reserves different.
understood.
Reserves are for emergencies, not maintenance, which we're going to do.
That we can definitely look at that. That's why we're having this conversation. So asset replacement, the Tri-County comparison, we have one, and I couldn't find one for TUD, but I did find one for AWA. And they do a target to maintain a capital reserve of 1% of asset value, net of depreciation for capital assets for which debt service is not currently being paid. So not sure that that would be something we would be interested in.
Interesting formula. I wonder
Yeah.
where that would end up for us. But
Yeah, I don't know that that would end up.
Do these guys actually, we've got their policy, but are they actually doing it?
That's also a good question.
That's
We're
the
not sure.
question.
They're as broke as we are.
Yes,
I
exactly.
can actually speak to that one. Amador does fully fund their reserves.
All of them?
The only one that is currently a little bit underfunded is their operating reserve, but it will be fully funded in fiscal year 27.
WA.
You, Kamiko.
You're welcome.
Debt services, the purpose is to provide funds in accordance with the debt issuance, as we talked about before. Such reserves are established in accordance with the legal covenants of the debt issue. So currently at 122,000 for that one.
That's the interest reserve, right?
For the
That's
debt-
probably where
debt-
that is housed. Yeah, but within that.
308.
Rate stabilization, another interesting, Michael and I were just talking about this yesterday, intended to assist in the smoothing of future rate increases by allowing graduated increases over time. The reserve could provide a buffer should revenue estimates not meet projections, and this is supposed to be a minimum of 10% of operating revenues. So currently underfunded.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one that is worth revisiting, as Kelly mentioned. I think in pulling all this together, we've identified some things that need to be updated and some areas that we should bring back to address. And I think this is a one where we would probably look for some direction from the committee on, because it is, it has not historically been used. And there's downsides to, while it sounds like a good idea, there's downsides to doing it, right? So if you have a target for a rate stabilization fund, and then you use that fund to offset, some potential future rate increases, you then have to though fund that and, rebuild that reserve, presumably with rates, to get it back to what that target is. And this is something we come up against in CPPA, where we have a rate stabilization fund. There was an instance a few years ago where there was a big unexpected increase in the electricity rate that we had to charge our customers, including CCWD, that was unanticipated in January. So nobody had time to budget for it. And so CPPA used a rate stabilization fund to offset at least some of that increase, so it didn't impact everybody's budgets mid-year. But then the next year, to put that fund back to where the target is, you have to increase rates a little bit more than you otherwise would have had to. So whether or not it is a benefit, in our case, it's hard to imagine that type of scenario where we have a surprise rate increase that is significant, that we need a rate stabilization fund. We usually are planning for that, through rate studies well in advance. So one that, we have a lot of different reserve funds. Not all of them are, fully utilized or fully funded. And this is one that we might want to consider, either doing away with and repurposing those funds, whether that helps us rebuild the 90-day emergency reserve, or we use it for this intended purpose. And the operating budget essentially is where it would go then. It's just something to consider. Move forward.
Tri-county comparison, so AWA has a rate stabilization reserve of 1 million for water and 100,000 for wastewater. And they use it to address urgent capital needs while minimizing sudden impacts to rates.
Do they ever use it as far as, I mean, since our account's on here?
No,
Did they ever
they've
use
never
it?
had to use it, and it's also a function, it's actually a required reserve for debt issuance for them. So there is that component to it as well, but they've never had to use it.
Which we'd have to go back in the historical record, but my understanding was the 713 that is in our rate stabilization fund was initially for that purpose as well. It was a required covenant as part of a debt issuance, but we'd have to go back and track down which one that was. But we have a separate reserve for that purpose as well. So I think we have some opportunities here to kind of streamline our reserve structure.
Got to go through 218 process. I can't imagine we're going to have a surprise.
Hey,
Right.
water rights. This purpose of this reserve is to cover costs associated with efforts to secure, protect, and preserve the district's water rights. May include funding projects and other activities which will enhance, protect, secure, and preserve water rights for beneficial use. Minimum goal of $3 million, and that reserve is currently fully funded.
Assume that $3 million is intended to do, well, obviously it says, if they ever get in a big lawsuit, this is, I guess, our.
Yeah, so it is kind of
box.
the war chest for water rights litigation essentially is one way to think about it. Because water rights processes can be costly and we are always doing the best we can to navigate that without litigation, but that is sort of our defense budget for water rights. The other interesting part about this, so we, at least internally, we haven't adopted the formal reserve policy change, but we've sort of commingled our FERC reserve with this fund, which is another 2.4 million, I think it is. And so it's another one that we'll bring back to the committee if we were to recommend recommendations.
Like that.
If we were to bring recommendations back to the committee, that's another consideration is formally combining those funds or do we keep them separate?
Which fund is that? What's the number on it?
I think that one is just in the hydro operating fund right now.
$3 million?
Oh, the 3 million? Oh, that'd be within the interest reserve.
That's the 2.45. We have 2.45 in FERC relicensing fees that we have FERC relicensing funding earmarked for that purpose, but there is no associated reserve for it. So it's a slide, we'll get to slide 22.
Okay, you'll tell me where that $3 million is?
That's in the interest reserve.
Yeah.
And which one, the water? 308?
Yes.
Could I interject a question here? I see that AWA has a rate stabilization reserve of 1 million for water and 100,000 for wastewater. It looks like our target is 2.95 million. Why are we thinking that our reserve has to be 3 times what they?
In the text of our reserve, it states 10%. So that's the target. We want to change that reserve policy. We can absolutely do that. That's what it's currently set at. We want to get more in line with one of the other districts.
That's one we'll bring back to the committee with a recommended change.
Recommendations. Seems like a lot.
Consideration.
Yes.
I mean, we're probably twice the size of Amador, so that might be part of it. But I think there's a question as to whether we need that fund at all.
Okay.
Moving on to CIP cash flow. This is discretionary project fund to be used to pre-fund grants and other reimbursable CIP programs. The minimum goal of $2 million. Pairing other districts.
Let me ask a quick question about the CIP cash flow. We took out a bunch of loans. We have a lot of cash we're using quickly. Isn't that sufficient to cover our CIP?
For those specific projects, we
Yeah.
can't use those loan proceeds for any other project that wasn't specifically listed in those for
Loan
those
documents.
loans. So we can't use them. We can only use them for the intended projects that they were borrowed for.
So these are for other projects. that are not
Correct.
Under
Right.
that debt.
Yes, sir.
And which fund is that under? I'm sorry, I keep coming back to this. I'm just trying to
That's
reconcile.
okay. And I wish I had outlined that in the presentation.
I think that's also interest reserve.
That would
And
be,
it would be split between water and sewer.
Yes.
I'd have to confirm that, but
2 million. We got about 5 million of the just reserve 9. Okay, got it.
Michael, can you give me an example of when we have pre-funded any grant? Anything that we anticipate that would be funded by a grant? I think we always wait to start a project until the grant funds are available.
it's usually most of the grant programs we participate in are reimbursement programs where we'll cover the cost and then we
Okay.
submit the reimbursement and receive the reimbursement. But we don't often get, I can't think of any grants that we get where they give us the money.
This would be like with the Army Corps one that we just got, we'd use this money.
The Army Corps one is a little bit different because that money doesn't, the actual federal contribution to that project doesn't flow through us. It's not a reimbursement program. We have an in-kind contribution that we're responsible for. And then the Army Corps covers their costs. We're working with them to see if they were change that. Very inefficient, but that's the current status of that program. But most of the funding sources that we rely on, USDA, FEMA, Water Board, those are reimbursement programs.
And that's what we use this cash flow for. Some of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question from an accounting perspective. Is it, or do we specifically draw from this when we need to, or is there some fluidity between that and the operating reserve?
in my mind, if it was functioning the way it seems to be designed, that would be the case. So if we had to lay out money for a FEMA disaster, right? You could take money from whatever applicable reserve, and then you would replenish it with the reimbursement that you get from FEMA. So it's just a matter of how they're actually functioning. For
do
capital
we
projects,
often have to actually draw from this to cover the upfront costs, or is our cash flow, is the operating reserve usually enough to cover that?
my understanding is that the operating is enough and that we're not doing the journal entries to actually dip
Right.
into the different
Which would make sense to
reserves.
me, yeah.
And that's essentially just another step that's, I don't believe is being done. I haven't gotten that deep into that process yet. All educational for me at this point.
But I
So,
assume if we weren't sufficient, this would be that fund we draw on.
alrighty, moving on to the Tri-County, we have 2 million discretionary project fund. TUD has a similar they use theirs for the replacement of capital assets and capital projects. And it's interesting because it looks like it's just something that they do through their budgeting process. It doesn't seem like there's a set amount. So that I could find. 608 special projects. This is established for board directed projects and derived from a portion of the district's annual property tax. According to the policy, the target is that the board will consider reserve funded projects during the budget process.
And on this one, I just want to provide some clarification because I think this is accurate and consistent with the text of the policy. My experience here is this generally just gets used as part of our CIP and or capital outlay funding needs. So, kind of might give the false impression that this is just directors, individual directors, special projects, and that's never how we've operated. But it is, it is used for infrastructure and equipment purchases.
I'm sure you guys have discussed this before on the board, but why don't we'll get that in discussion.
Yeah, like I said, I think
It's
there's some
$1.5 million
opportunity here to streamline and clarify our reserve structure.
I got to ask again, what fund is this $1.5 million sitting?
It's also in the operating.
Operating?
Interest reserve.
Yep. I can send you a breakout of all the locations.
you
We
can,
have a document that has where they're all located. So
Or is
you
that?
have the correct information.
It would be very helpful when this comes
Of
back
course.
to the board.
Yes, sir. Expansion funds are restricted to fund only growth-related capital improvements or pay for growth-related debt. These come from capacity fees and investment interest. And they have to be used as per Government Code 6600. They can only be expended for the purpose for which the fee was originally collected. Questions on that one? Pretty straightforward. TUD has one also. They call theirs the capital reserve charge, capacity and connection charges. And they use it for infrastructure caused from growth in that area. They have some certain restrictions on that one. Then our last two items really for consideration and just for food for thought. The FERC relicensing money, which is 2.45 million. And Michael can definitely speak to this one. We're the thought is either creating a new reserve or incorporating it in those funds into the water reserve, the water rights reserve. So
Yeah, and now that we have we created the new hydropower enterprise, it might make sense to leave this as a separate fund and not consolidate it with the water resources reserve. But we'll bring a recommendation back on that front. And then the fuel reduction balance, there's a little bit of an interesting backstory there. So
I'm sorry, the what?
as we're on the second to last
Fuel-
slide, or the second to last slide, just what's called the fuel reduction fund. And so this resulted from, it's about 5 years ago, we had a grant funded fuel thinning project for around our Arnold wastewater plant. And so fuel thinning that was funded by the Forest Service, I believe. And we actually, not only was it a grant funded project, but we received about $35,000 in timber sales revenue from the project that was unrestricted. And the thinking at the time was, that's nice. Let's see if we can roll that into, can we develop a program where we're doing additional fuel thinning projects? And this could be, a local match, a source for a local match or project development, and then see if we can generate additional revenue out of future fuel thinning projects and have a self-sustaining regular fuel thinning program. It hasn't developed, but I think there was some enthusiasm behind it at the time. I think the part of the challenge is it takes staff time to develop that type of program, and that's always at a premium. So worth revisiting how we want to utilize those funds.
Is there any, why would we have one fund, one reserve fund set up for FERC relicensing and not just put it in the water?
So-
Which has got, I don't want to bring down the water. I think that 3
Yeah.
million's sober. We have this other money too.
So like I said, for like internal practical purposes, we think of those as the same. It's the Water Resources and FERC relicensing fund. We never made that formal policy change to the reserve policy. But I think there is it's worth considering leaving this as the reserve for the hydropower enterprise. And that could be very important when we look at potential financing needs for relicensing. So we may need reserve funds there as well. Not that they couldn't still be repurposed. Those are unrestricted funds, so they could potentially still be repurposed if we end up in a drawn out water rights litigation battle. But I think now that we have that hydro enterprise fund, the case to be made for making sure there's reserves there as well.
What is the source of this, that 2.4?
That was initially that resulted from a settlement. So those are unrestricted funds.
So that 2.45 million would be kind of I've heard references to we may need to spend 30 million getting the licensing done. Have that in your cash reserves?
We don't.
million?
No, but we may need to borrow for that, and that this might be an important piece of our ability to borrow. So that's where it might make sense to leave it in that enterprise. That's part of why we created the hydro enterprise, was to make sure we protect the water and sewer funds, so that the borrowing capacity we have for infrastructure isn't impacted by any borrowing that we do for hydropower, that we're not diminishing the borrowing capacity for water and wastewater infrastructure, and that those funds are protected in case anything happens on the hydropower side.
5.4 water type of work.
Great. So potential next steps, just looking for any comments that you might have that we could discuss on these policies. Please provide us with any direction you'd like to see us move forward on regarding revisions to the policies, and go ahead and make changes. Planning to bring this item back next Finance Committee meeting with the proposed changes. Process.
Yeah, and Kelly's done a great job of kind of giving us a clear picture of this, and I'm glad we took the time to work through this. Because there's, like I said, there's clearly some areas, some opportunities here for clarification and streamlining. And so maybe instead of putting, unless if you have specific recommendations, feel free to share those with us. But I think we'll also be just working on what we think is the best reserve structure for us, and bring that back for further discussion.
Okay. The elephant in the room is that the NCPA arrangement. So I don't know whether we should have a closed session on, get an update on our relationship with NCPA. And
Well, I mean, I don't think that necessarily impacts what the reevaluating our current reserve structure and bringing forward, best practices and updating all of that to make sure that our reserve structure is the right one for us. So I don't think that necessarily affects this work effort. We want to, like I said, I think some of this was kind of, there was some good intent behind some of these different reserve funds that may or may not have been fully utilized to fulfill that intent. And so we can revisit now and decide whether we can collapse some of these funds into each other and come back with a better structure that's easier to understand for everybody.
Kelly, what is on the asset replacement? Which fund is that?
That's going to be in interest reserve too, I think.
I believe so, sir. Yes, and so it's also split between the water and the sewer. So I'm not sure which.
308 and 508. So when we bring this, if we want to have this
On 325, I see it.
discussion with the board, oh, you're right, it is separate.
And
And
525.
525, yeah.
Yes,
Sorry, I could have answered my own
no,
question.
that's okay.
Apologies.
But I think it would be, yeah, we can bring this back with, and maybe even for future fund
Absolutely.
balance reports, maybe subcategories underneath the interest reserves, because that's really just a combination of multiple different reserve funds
Yeah.
that are
It's
pooled to generate interest.
my draft had all of that information and I stripped it out. So now I know.
I would love to be more useful, but I just got this, so I
Of course.
apologize. Stuff that jumps off, obviously, and I think you guys will take this up, is the rate stabilization reserve. This is all the same color money. It's not restricted, so we have some ability to move that.
Yes, sir.
Special projects reserve. I don't think that's a good title for a reserve, and I'm not so sure it's necessary since it hasn't been used. These monies, that 1.56 million can be put in other reserves that are, we actually have a number associated with it to
Yep.
reach our goals. Those are the obvious ones that jump out at me that I would like to spend more time looking at it. Operating reserves, 90-day emergency, those are all pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, so really just at a high level without having had much time to go into this. Those would be two that I think we ought to take a look at.
Perfect.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that in my personal life, I often put together lots of different accounts to keep things separate, but it sometimes makes it hard to see the big picture. But at the same time, it makes it easier to track. So it doesn't seem like our reserves are wholly inadequate. They're not fully funded, but we've done a pretty good job,
Absolutely
in my
have.
opinion. A lot of reserves here. Spread out.
We'll work on it. We'll bring it back.
Yeah, and I think it probably makes most sense to bring it back to this committee before we bring this discussion to the full board. We'll bring back with some of those recommendations and that additional information. And since this is the first time you've had a chance to see it, we bring it back here and take a more have some more time to think through it before we take it to the full board.
Yeah, there's almost $2 million just in those two funds we could shift around to fill up the other required. And I think that we have to be sober in our reserve policy and that our risks on a daily basis are relatively minor. People are going to keep paying their water bill and their sewer bill for the most part, right? So it's not like we're in a market that just could all stop tomorrow unless everybody builds an outhouse out back and goes a well. So I think that we should have my general philosophy is a modest reserve policy that meets any of our obviously our debt payment reserves, asset replacement, emergency replacement. I don't want to go overboard because I've seen many places, including the state of California, have rainy day reserves that they just refuse to use on rainy days. So
Good.
I don't want to be sitting on a whole bunch of money
Agreed.
that we could put to work.
Absolutely.
And let you figure out what that looks like.
Thank you very much, Kelly. All right. We have item number 4, general manager comments.
Just that we're at Aqua next week and then board meeting following week, and engineering committee was moved from next week because of that Aqua conference to the following week as well. So we'll have engineering committee and board meeting. I think it's the 11th and 12th. And
Isn't it 12th and 13th?
or 12th and 13th.
I think so. Engineering on the 12th?
Board meeting on 13th.
Other than that, we're deep into budget development, and so the finance committee meeting next month will be, that rate update and preliminary budget presentation. So
How's the budget looking? Can you give us a preview?
overall, I think we're in good shape. It's surprising every year. It surprises me how little of our budget is discretionary. And almost everything we do, it has to get done and it's optional. And so we look for cost savings wherever we can find it. But we don't have a whole lot of optional work here at CCWD. So we're always looking for the most efficient way to do things. Department heads put a lot of work into that, and so we're gonna go back through it all again and see where we end up. Present that to the finance committee next month.
A major crisis that you're seeing?
No major crisis that I'm anticipating.
There's a lot of nationwide discussion about fuel prices and stuff. How is the increase in fuel affecting us?
hard to predict from year to year. That's one of those line items that can bite us sometimes, depending on what happens over the course of a year. But I don't. Yeah, it's one of those tough ones. I don't know if we want to budget for $5 a gallon. So hopefully it comes back down, but we also want to be conservative in how we budget. So.
Did all right with our purchase, our CCPA.
Yeah, CPPA rates are coming down a little bit, which is great. And hopefully they'll be more stable and more predictable going forward, because that's another one that has fluctuated a lot.
Amazing how much better.
Fortunate to have that access to cheap power. So yeah, that one will be more predictable going forward.
Have discussed before. Partnerships, solar, anything that comes up, cogen.
Yeah, I know that CPPA rate's a double-edged sword because of how great it is. We benefit from that greatly, but it also makes a lot of those projects harder they're not economically beneficial because our current power rate is already so low.
We're getting close.
But but it's always a benefit to us where we can reduce load, right? So whether we have a favorable electrical rate or not, if we can reduce load and pay less, that's something we're always looking at. So those CPPA grants, which that grant program used to be every 3 years you were eligible for a grant, it changed to every year. So we're going to go after those grants every year, and wherever we can be more efficient, reduce our electrical load, we'll do that.
Let's keep an eye on the Energy Commission, see if they've got any grants for public agencies to reduce power consumption. Just add it to the list of all the things we comb through on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's a good point. We are an energy intensive operation. We pump a lot of water.
Maybe they got a program.
How about the Phoenix project? Anything new to report on that?
That one, so for the biomass project in West Point, we're doing everything we can to try to encourage PG&E to provide a little bit of extra time for construction is where that's at right now. And they've actually already started construction. There's a brand new water tank up there right now. They're moving ahead, but they need an extension of time to complete construction under that biomat contract that they have with PG&E. So we're doing everything we can to help support that request.
I've noticed that the public outreach that PG&E has been engaged in, they're trying to put a friendlier face out there, and one in particular featured the lady who is the executive director or the manager of PG&E.
Yeah.
Anybody have her personal telephone number?
We have asked, and it's not, they don't hand that out very easily, but we also have asked people who know how to get a hold of her. So we're working on all that.
Okay.
They're using images of our powerhouse in their commercials, so at least they could do a B to pickup.
Ours.
Collierville, yeah. So, and it just occurred to me after these last items, I'm not sure if we asked for public comment. I don't know if we want to circle back or on any of that.
Can you look on the screen and see if we have anybody questioning our activities here today?
No online public comment.
All
Okay,
right.
just wanted to make sure we do.
Yep. Good point. Okay. You mentioned Chandler and future agenda position for them.
Yeah, so they provide, I don't know, annual, but periodic updates on our investments. And next month's meeting is probably going to be pretty packed. So maybe we shoot for that for the following month and have Chandler come and give us an update on investment portfolio.
Okay. Well, we talked about having a regular meeting on the 13th. Will we have a meeting on the 27th as well?
No, I think for finance committee.
No, for CCWD regular meeting.
Oh, yes, that's the plan.
But finance committee would be what date? Do you know?
19th. Yeah, Tuesday, the 19th.
Okay, Michael, does that conclude your comments?
Yes, sir.
Director Garamendi, do you have any comments and items?
It hasn't been discussed.
Anytime that we mention rate stabilization, rate reduction, rate increases and stuff, it always pops into my mind that some of the public meetings that we have during those sessions, and a very memorable comment, somebody stood up and said, if you had raised rates higher last time, you wouldn't have to do so much this time. So that's a kind of a strange observation, but I guess it's, anyway, I'm hoping that we can do something, some of our rate stabilization funds, if we can. And it occurs to me that Director Davidson has been around here for decades. He probably should know all about these policies. He will.
Got on in September 1946, right?
He did.
Founding member of this board.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I
I've been out here that long.
I was 3 years old when the agency district was formed, so I was in a different county. Had to wait a long time before I could become involved. All right. Like it says on the agenda, the next meeting is on the 19th at 1 o'clock, May 19th. So I guess that we are finishing a half hour before our scheduled adjournment. Should we stick around and talk some more? Or what? No? Okay. All right. Well, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks everybody for attending.